staying on top of compliance. Hmm. It can sometimes feel like you're constantly chasing something, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially with regulations always seeming to shift and, the ever-present need for audits.
Exactly. So whether you're maybe actively prepping for one right now, or just trying to get your head around compliance in your particular field, or maybe you're simply interested in what makes a really strong foundation, well, you're definitely in the right place.
Yeah, definitely. Today, we're taking a deep dive into what it really means to build uh, a robust compliance culture.
And we're drawing insights directly from Qualio's compliance culture presentation.
That's right, the one by Sumatha and Henry. They outlined what that kind of culture looks like, why it's, well, frankly, essential, and gave some really practical steps for embedding it into your day-to-day operations.
Precisely. And according to Sumatha and Henry's presentation, there are really three core elements that underpin a strong compliance culture: people, process, and data.
hmm And you really have to think of them as interconnected. Each one truly supports the others. You need all three for sustainable compliance.
So, our mission today, if you like, is to dig into these three areas. We want to pull out the most valuable insights from what Sumatha and Henry shared and give you some concrete takeaways.
Basically, to help you understand how to cultivate this kind of thriving compliance culture, but, without feeling totally overwhelmed by all the details. So should we kick things off with that first critical element, people?
Okay, let's unpack this. When we talk about people in a compliance culture, it's just so much more than, say, ticking boxes for training completed, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's about genuine engagement, a real sense of accountability, really at every level of the organization.
Samatha and Henry's presentation, they brought up this interesting idea of audit readiness being more like a spectrum.
Yeah, I liked how they framed that. It's not just the simple yes or no, are you ready? It's more of a journey. Companies can find themselves, anywhere from feeling completely unprepared, maybe a bit anxious even, all the way to being totally ready and, well, confident when an auditor walks in the door. Most places are probably somewhere in the middle figuring things out.
Right. And a really key step in moving towards that confident end of the spectrum, they said, involves pinpointing your subject matter experts, your SMEs, for those crucial processes within your QMS, your quality management system.
Yes, and what's crucial here, as Samatha and Henry highlighted, is that these SMEs aren't just sort of vaguely familiar with the process.
Yeah.
They need to have real demonstrable expertise. They need to feel a genuine sense of ownership for their specific areas.
Okay.
And importantly, be able to explain how things work clearly, concisely, without needing a script in front of them.
Yeah, that's key. They use the example of quality planning and that fundamental task of defining the QMS scope, really drilling down to those core business critical process groups and all their individual steps.
Exactly. You need people who deeply understand that and can articulate it.
And then when audit time actually approaches, they also emphasized putting together a well-defined A team for the audit itself.
Right, the A team.
Yeah.
It was insightful how they broke down those roles. You've got the authorized escort, the person guiding the auditor, the scribe who's diligently taking notes,
Yep.
the runner handling logistics, fetching documents, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And of course, the all-important SME for the specific area being looked at.
Yeah.
Each role really helps things run much more smoothly.
And it's not just about these specific roles during the heat of an audit, is it? It's that bigger picture. The overarching influence of leadership seems absolutely vital.
Oh, completely. Leadership really needs to foster an environment where audit readiness and just a strong compliance mindset can actually flourish.
So how does that work in practice?
Well, connecting it to the bigger picture, the leadership team, they really set the tone for the entire organization, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Their visible involvement, consistent messaging that's key for getting buy-in across all the different departments.
And the resources.
And crucially, yes, providing ongoing resources, not just scrambling when an audit notice lands, that signals a real commitment to continuous improvement and reinforces that compliance culture.
Now, Sumatha and Henry's presentation actually tackled a really interesting question they got from their audience. Does this quality culture have to be driven strictly top-down, or can it bubble up from the bottom?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what's interesting is the interplay they described. While Sumatha and Henry definitely emphasize that strong support from top management is, well, foundational
Right, you need that foundation.
for establishing the culture, providing the resources.
Yeah.
They also really highlighted that initiatives and active engagement from individuals and teams at all levels are incredibly valuable. They contribute significantly to the strength of it all.
So it's not really an either situation.
Exactly. It's really a collaborative effort. You need both.
That makes a lot of sense. They also outline some pretty common cultural obstacles, things that can really get in the way of effective compliance, like not having a clear, direct line to leadership.
Yeah, that's a big one. When that direct line is missing, compliance efforts can easily become isolated, right? They lack the visibility and maybe the clout needed to drive real change.
And another major hurdle they mentioned was leadership viewing compliance mainly as just a cost center.
Ugh, yes. That mindset really needs shifting. Sumatha and Henry underscored how important it is to clearly show how compliance actually generates tangible value for the business.
Like what kind of value?
Things like gaining access to critical markets, ensuring smoother, faster product launches, building that crucial trust with customers and regulators. It's an investment, not just a cost.
They also touched on quality teams sometimes maybe operating in a bit of a silo, using too much technical jargon that just doesn't land with the rest of the business.
That can create a real disconnect, can't it? The key, as they pointed out, is for compliance folks to connect their work directly to the commercial side of things,
Okay.
using language everyone understands to explain the impact on those key areas: market access, launches, trust.
And the last blocker they mentioned, lack of visibility.
Yeah, especially into processes that are still really reliant on manual systems, like paper or scattered spreadsheets. It just leaves everyone struggling to see who's doing what and where the risks might be hiding.
But okay, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Samatha and Henry offered some clear ways to tackle these roadblocks. A big one was focusing on demonstrating that tangible value.
Exactly. Speaking the language of the business, like we just said, clearly showing how compliance affects those critical commercial outcomes.
Right.
And they also, quite rightly, pointed out how putting in a digital QMS can provide that much needed transparency. Makes it easier for everyone to see the bigger picture, track things properly.
And they went further, didn't they? Laying out 5 specific things to really demand from leaders to build a genuine compliance culture. This is where it gets really practical. First up was clear structure.
Yeah, making sure everyone understands their role, how compliance fits into their responsibilities. It sounds basic, but it's often missed.
Then setting SMART goals for compliance.
Right. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound objectives that actually align with the business mission, not just vague intentions.
Tracking performance was another one, actually monitoring key metrics.
Yeah, understanding what's working, where improvements are needed, rather than just, guessing or assuming. Data-driven decisions.
And regular weekly reviews. That seemed quite specific.
It did, but it makes sense. Making dedicated time for those check-ins keeps compliance front and center. It ensures it's an ongoing conversation, not just an audit time panic.
Okay, and the 5th one, a shared culture.
Yes. Leaders need to actively champion and, crucially, model a consistent, company-wide commitment to compliance in everything they do. Sumatha and Henry argued these 5 demands really help turn good intentions into concrete actions.
And that shift in communication they talked about seemed important too.
Absolutely. Moving away from those dense, purely technical QRA reports towards using more accessible, just normal language, maybe injecting a bit of positive energy, even excitement.
Right.
And really focusing on the business-wide implications of compliance to get everyone on board.
And finally, you've got to celebrate successes. Actually recognize and reward people and teams for contributing to compliance.
Totally. And what was valuable here was the practical advice Sumatha and Henry gave, like using KPIs not just for tracking, but for recognition. Maybe friendly competitions to boost engagement.
Yeah, I liked that.
And consistently acknowledging and acting on suggestions for improvement from anyone in the company. They even gave examples like public shout-outs from leadership, or maybe annual awards like an innovation champion or a process hero.
Process hero. I like that. Okay, so that covers the people pillar quite thoroughly. Let's pivot now to the second core component, process. What are some of those telltale signs that a company's compliance culture might need, well, a bit of a shot in the arm when it comes to its processes?
Right, process. Well, Sumatha and Henry outlined several key indicators. First, just having way too many disconnected systems.
Ah, the classic scenario.
Yeah, think about trying to manage information spread across paper files, maybe shared drives like Dropbox or OneDrive, individual desktops, random Excel sheets.
Nightmare.
It inevitably creates huge headaches during audits, right? Makes it incredibly difficult to find what you need, slows everything down. It's just inefficient.
Okay, that definitely paints a picture many might recognize. What else did they flag?
Recurring findings, that's a big red flag for both internal and external audits.
So, seeing the same issues pop up again and again.
Exactly. If you're seeing the same problems, if audit findings aren't actually leading to meaningful change, if you're not properly addressing your CAPAs, your corrective and preventive actions, and spotting the underlying trends, well, that's a clear sign your processes aren't really working effectively.
Okay. Any others?
They also mentioned the problem of data overload.
Right. Having mountains of data, but it doesn't actually tell you anything useful.
Precisely. It just sits there in spreadsheets or charts. Maybe it looks impressive, but it doesn't fuel any real continuous improvement. It's just noise.
Got it.
And finally, unstandardized processes. When critical tasks are done differently at different times or by different people, that introduces variability and consistency and just opens the door for compliance breakdowns.
Now, Samatha and Henry described this really interesting concept. They called it a deviation spiral. Can you walk us through that? It sounds insidious.
It is quite insightful, yeah. It describes how a process that starts out perfectly compliant can sort of gradually drift into non-compliance over time.
How does that happen?
Often it's through seemingly small things, incremental shortcuts, maybe minor deviations that just become accepted as the new normal because they weren't properly investigated or addressed.
Ah, okay. Death by a thousand cuts, almost.
Kind of. Over time, these little changes accumulate, and the process deviates so far from its original compliant design that eventually it just is non-compliant, without maybe one big, obvious failure point.
That sounds like a dangerously subtle way for standards to erode. So, okay, what were some of their top tips for really maximizing the effectiveness of the audit process, specifically looking at it from a process standpoint?
They offered 3 really key pieces of advice here. First, actively involve the key people who actually do the work, your relevant stakeholders, and those crucial SMEs,
Right, the people on the ground.
in mapping out your core business processes
Yeah.
from start to finish. Clearly identify all the steps, the handoffs, the interdependencies.
So, get the doers involved in defining how the work should be done and documented. Makes sense.
Precisely.
Right?
Second, shift the focus of your audits. Audit the processes themselves, not just individual departments in isolation.
Think bigger picture.
Yeah, think at a business-wide level. Look at the entire flow of a process. This is where tools like traceability matrices can be super valuable, making sure all core processes are clearly set up and properly linked together.
Okay, good tip. And the third one?
Audit across those departmental boundaries. Trace that end-to-end flow as processes move between different teams. Look specifically for variations, maybe inconsistencies in how systems are used.
And Officer Key there, I bet.
Absolutely. Identify any breakdowns in communication or gaps in responsibility at those critical handoff points. You need that holistic, overarching view.
They also talked about using the as is and to be approach within internal audits. How does that work practically?
Right, the as is to be model. The as is part is basically a thorough look at the current state of a process. What are the trends from your COPAs or deviation records telling you? What parts are actually working well right now?
Okay, so understanding the current reality.
Exactly. Then the to be phase is all about defining the desired future state. How can we optimize this process to ensure it's fully compliant? And importantly, this is also a chance to look for efficiencies, maybe areas where automation could help.
And this leads to...
Well, this whole analysis should lead to a prioritized to-do list. Action items, clear stakeholder assignments, realistic timelines, any necessary training plans, and identifying the right compliance KPIs to track progress going forward.
Speaking of KPIs, they mentioned some core compliance ones, didn't they? Like non-conformance or deviation rates, resolution times.
Yes, those are definitely standard and important metrics to track. Things like non-conformance deviation rates, compliance related to deliveries, resolution times for issues, internal audit findings may be tracked by month, standard clauses covered, QA budget tracking, closed COPAS rates.
Right, the usual suspects.
But Samatha and Henry also really stress the value of looking beyond those typical data points.
Oh, like what?
They suggested tracking things like recurring deviation rates are the same problems biting you again and again. What's the ratio of corrective actions versus preventive actions? Are you mostly fixing things after they break or preventing them beforehand?
Interesting distinction.
And also, where are quality issues being identified initially? Is it primarily the quality team finding problems, or is it also coming from the staff actually doing the work on the floor? These more nuanced metrics give you a much deeper read on how effective your improvements really are and just how strong that compliance culture is becoming.
The presentation also addressed that audience question about making internal audits more than just a tick box exercise, specifically for an ISO 14025 lab. What was Samatha and Henry's advice there?
Yeah, that was a good practical question. Their key recommendation was to really push to examine processes from the very beginning right through to the very end, making sure you cross all the relevant departmental lines.
So follow the whole thread.
Exactly. Actively involve the SMEs from each stage to explain the entire flow. They use the example of purchasing trace it through incoming inspection, into manufacturing, maybe linking into design control, paying really close attention to those handoffs between teams. Are they smooth? Well documented.
And that's what adds the real value.
That holistic end-to-end view is precisely what external auditors look for, and it's what makes an internal audit genuinely useful, much more than just checking off clauses on a list.
All right, that makes sense. Let's move on to the final piece of the puzzle, data, the third core component. How does data actually contribute to building that strong compliance culture?
Well, fundamentally, centralized data provides that absolutely critical compliance visibility.
Visibility, okay.
When your data is well organized, accessible, you can easily see who's received the right training, what actions have been completed, where potential risks might be cropping up.
So you can be more proactive.
Exactly. It allows you to shift from just reacting to issues as they happen to a much more proactive approach to managing risk. And as Sumatha and Henry really emphasized, at the end of the day, it's objective evidence, solid data that provides the undeniable proof of compliance.
Okay, so objective evidence is key. What are some best practices then for actually managing data in a way that really supports compliance?
They offered several key pieces of advice. First and foremost, use solid, reliable systems for managing and sharing your documents securely. And absolutely ensure you have comprehensive version control in place. That's non-negotiable.
Right. Avoids confusion.
Definitely. And don't overlook the basics. Adhere strictly to those LCOA plus principles. Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, plus complete, consistent, enduring, and available.
Got it. ALCOA++.
And implement sound documentation practices overall. Ideally, leverage digital tools to help automate and streamline these essential things. Makes life much easier and reduces errors.
And when it comes to actually preparing for an audit, how can you use your data most effectively?
The key is organization. Organize your objective evidence so it directly aligns with the auditor's likely agenda or plan.
Makes sense.
If you're using an electronic QMS and eQMS, take full advantage of features that let you create direct links. Links to the relevant documents, procedures, training records, maybe validation reports, any supporting attachments.
Just make it easy for them.
Exactly. The goal is to make it as simple and efficient as possible for the auditor to find precisely what they need when they need it, without having to dig through piles of irrelevant stuff.
They also talked about making compliance as painless as possible using modern tech tools.
Yes, that's a great point. Use technology strategically. Streamline those routine but critical tasks, like assigning and tracking training completion.
Training again.
Keeps coming up. Also, provide all your employees with easy access to a single source of truth for all compliance-related information. No hunting around multiple places.
And the system itself.
Prioritize ease of use and accessibility in whatever system you choose. If it's clunky or hard to use, people just won't use it consistently. That reduces friction and ultimately encourages better compliance.
Okay, so let's circle back to training since it came up again under data. It's clearly not enough just to deliver the training content, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
You need ways to actually verify that people have understood the material, not just click through slides.
Right. Verification of understanding.
You also need meticulous tracking, knowing training is complete for every key process step, for every relevant person. And crucially, you need to gather real-time feedback.
Feedback on the training.
On the training itself, yes, but also on the processes the training covers. Use that feedback to identify areas where maybe the process itself or the training about it could be improved. Good training is really your first line of defense.
And thinking about presenting this data to auditors, how do you make that compliance view simple and easy for them to digest?
Good systems help here. Use systems that let you create those clear, logical links between your defined processes and the objective evidence that supports them. Maybe use tags or metadata to categorize evidence effectively.
Make it searchable.
Exactly. And it can be really beneficial to think about creating a specific view just for auditors. Something that's clean, well organized, clearly shows your compliance posture, but minimizes unnecessary clutter that could just overwhelm them.
Because complexity doesn't impress auditors, does it?
Not usually, no. They value clarity. Simple visual connections between the compliance requirements and the evidence showing you meet them, that's what works best. Keep it straightforward.
Now let's talk about the audit itself. When it's actually happening, what are some key strategies for effectively demonstrating compliance using your data and your team?
Okay, during the audit, setting the right environment actually matters. Stable Wi-Fi is surprisingly crucial these days.
Huh.
A quiet, dedicated space for the auditors. Maybe offer snacks and drinks. Little things count. Then proactively try to understand what the auditor specifically needs. Provide relevant context around the data you present.
And honesty.
Be transparent and honest. If there have been mistakes or issues, own up to them and show what you've done or are doing about them. And be flexible. Adapt your approach in real time based on the auditor's preferences and requests.
And a real compliance culture should just show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ultimately, a genuine compliance culture shines through. It's evident in the natural flow of conversation, how comfortable your team seems engaging with the auditor, and people clearly understanding their roles and responsibilities, not just, repeating lines they memorized. It feels authentic.
Samatha and Henry introduced this interesting idea of the Goldilocks approach to providing evidence. Not too much, not too little. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the Goldilocks approach, it's all about finding that just right balance.
Okay.
Providing helpful, relevant extra information when it clearly adds context or answers a follow-up question. But being really careful not to underwhelm the auditor by giving too little, nor overwhelm them with a huge data dump that isn't directly relevant to what they asked for.
So it's about relevance and timing.
Precisely. Providing the right evidence at the right time for the right request. That's the sweet spot.
So following on from that, how can you ensure the evidence you're presenting is genuinely relevant, timely, and really lines up with what the auditor actually needs in that moment?
Well, think about it from the auditor's perspective. They often have very specific requests, right? Show me the records from the management review meeting held in Q2.
Okay, specific.
Yeah. They're looking for concise, directly relevant information that specifically addresses that request. They don't want, the entire history of management reviews or a bunch of unrelated operational data.
Just answer the question.
Basically, yes.
Okay.
Listen carefully to their request and focus on providing precisely what they've asked for in a clear, organized way. Don't bury the answer.
Now, Samatha and Henry wrapped up their presentation by emphasizing something quite powerful, that a well-handled audit response can actually be a springboard towards an even stronger compliance culture. What's the core idea there?
It's really about adopting that mindset of continuous learning and improvement. The audit isn't just an endpoint, it's an opportunity.
Okay.
After the audit is done, take the time as a team to properly reflect. What went really well? Why did it go well? And just as importantly, be honest about areas where there's room for improvement.
And then act on it.
And then this is the crucial bit. Translate those learnings into concrete action. Develop clear plans, set realistic timelines for implementing any necessary changes based on the findings or your own reflections. Use it to get better.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Qualio's compliance culture presentation, the key message really seems to boil down to that strong, essential interconnectedness of people, process, and data.
Absolutely. You really need all three working together. You need engaged, knowledgeable individuals throughout the organization.
Right, the people.
You need standardized, efficient processes that are actually understood and followed consistently.
The process.
And you need robustly managed, accessible data to not only demonstrate compliance when asked, but to actually build and maintain that culture of quality day in, day out.
Exactly. Our goal today was really to give you a clear, actionable understanding of these core principles, hopefully without making it feel overwhelming. Kind of a shortcut to grasping the essentials for building that thriving compliance culture.
Yeah, distilling those key insights from Samatha and Henry's work.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. Reflecting on these three critical pillars, people, process, and data, which one right now presents maybe the most significant opportunity for strengthening your own compliance culture?
Good question.
And maybe what's just one small, concrete step you could potentially take, maybe even starting today or tomorrow to begin addressing it? Keep exploring how these core principles can be strategically applied within your specific context.